Traditionally, martial arts is all about respect and compassion, but these 10 fierce rivalries showed us just how ugly things can get. Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Race, culture, religion, family, nothing was off the table when Conor McGregor and Khabib Nurmagomedov locked horns back in 2018. It seems like a distant memory now, but it's important to remember when UFC 229 first came around that Khabib was by no means the global sensation he is today. Indeed, he was popular, but it took an opponent like Conor to really show us exactly what type of man he was, the type of man who would not let the foul-mouthed tirades of the notorious go unpunished. After Khabib cornered and humiliated Conor's longtime training partner Artem Lobov in New York, McGregor boarded a plane immediately and proceeded to launch a full-on assault on a bus that carried the lightweight contender. When they finally met face-to-face, nothing was off-limits for the Irishman. He attacked Khabib's religious beliefs, his wife, his culture, and the fighting ability of his people as a whole. Khabib, however, would show up in a big way on fight night, dominating McGregor for 4 rounds before tapping him with a neck crank, before vaulting over the cage to attack Conor's teammate Dillon Danis in perhaps the single most insane post-fight moment in the history of the sport. And though these two only shared the cage on that one occasion, the UFC 223 Media Day bus attack, the insane press conferences, the flight of the eagle over the octagon, all of these moments will still be talked about decades from now. 2.4 million pay-per-view buys to this day is still the highest-selling UFC event of all time, making it a rivalry that is truly in a league of its own. Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. 25 minutes to settle their beef just wasn't enough. For Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, being former roommates, sparring partners, and cornermen, their relationship hit a truly shocking low point. Check any of this pair's pre-feud UFC outings, and you're likely going to see the other standing behind them in their corner, holding their bucket, ready to offer advice. But once they started to both hold positions within that welterweight top 5, you could slowly see the tension brewing. All of a sudden, after a few pointed comments traded in the media, these one-time friends turned into the most bitter of enemies. Masvidal would take aim at Colby for being fake. Then Colby would retaliate by citing their shared training experiences. They eventually fought and seemingly settled the score, but with Covington coming out on top, the insults did not stop there. If there were any doubts over this beef's legitimacy, they were put to bed as soon as these two kept jawing at each other post-fight. The beef got so bad that Masvidal actually tracked Colby down at a Miami restaurant and assaulted him, sucker punching him in an attack that caused damage to Covington's teeth and his $90,000 Rolex watch. At the time, Jorge was arrested and has since been released on bond. Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. Sometimes an unstoppable force collides with an immovable object. And well, it's easy to see how Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz were made for each other. Had Rafael dos Anjos not injured himself, we would have likely never gotten Diaz-McGregor 1. But as soon as these two took to the mic opposite one another, it was pure fireworks. For the first time, Conor had an opponent in front of him who wouldn't take his trash talk sitting down. Nate openly mocked the Irishman for fighting midgets in the 145-pound division, while Conor jabbed at Nate for faking his gangster image. McGregor pushed and pushed, and Nate barely budged. When the time came to fight, these two mean-mugged each other right up to that opening bell. And when Nate eventually managed to secure the upset via shocking second-round submission, the moment of peace they shared in the post-fight quickly turned back into an even bigger beef in their immediate rematch. From bottles being thrown at press conferences to kicks being fired off at weigh-ins, these two could not wait to get into the cage together. And when it finally happened, the end result was an instant classic. Conor got the win via narrow majority decision, leaving fans desperate for a third and final installment. Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier. Sometimes fighters play up their beef for dramatic effect, but for Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier, the octagon might have caught a real-life murder if it weren't for the fact that the cameras were rolling. From DC telling Jon that he would love nothing more than to spit in his face, to Jon telling DC he would actually kill him if he tried, Jones-Cormier is, without question, on the Mount Rushmore of MMA rivalries. Not only are these two of the greatest fighters to have ever laced up gloves, but their clash on a personal level is just so pronounced that it makes the idea of reconciliation down the line virtually impossible. Jones went 2-0 over Cormier, firmly stamping down his authority on their competitive rivalry. TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt. Another beef forged over years on the training mats. By the time all was said and done, TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt were mortal enemies. Prior to their pair of title showdowns, Dillashaw and Garbrandt were happily training away under the Team Alpha Male banner, guided by head coach Uriah Faber as they attempted to finally dethrone the longtime champion and enemy of the gym, Dominic Cruz. When Dillashaw eventually left the camp to hook up with former Alpha Male striking coach Dwayne Ludwig, Faber and Garbrandt accused TJ of betraying his teammates. Soon, the snake in the grass brass comments flooded into the headlines, along with the not-so-subtle hints that TJ was doping, which he totally was. Cody went at Dillashaw like it was truly personal, and a season spent coaching opposite one another on The Ultimate Fighter proved beyond a doubt that it was. Lines were crossed, brawls kicked off, and all in all, it was one hell of a season of television. TJ would, of course, go on to knock Cody out twice to capture and defend the bantamweight title, but some wounds cut too deep, and to this day, the relationship between both parties has not been repaired. Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, the striker and the wrestler, the hero and the villain, the Iceman and the Huntington Beach bad boy. But you might not know just how deep this legendary feud actually goes. As two of the breakout stars of the sport's golden era, their pair of matchups marked some of the biggest pay-per-view events of the decade. Once managed by Dana White, Tito took issue with the future UFC president's increasing focus on fight promotion and his fixation on the rising talent Liddell, who he gladly took under his wing. But initially, Ortiz didn't want to fight Liddell, calling him a friend who he'd rather not compete against. Chuck, however, saw it differently, downplaying their friendship and citing their many training sessions as proof that Tito didn't want to fight him. The media, of course, ate these comments up, and Tito would eventually accuse Chuck of selling out, claiming that money had changed him entirely. When they eventually fought, and Liddell beat him with relative ease on 2 different occasions, it didn't seem to make any difference to the intensity of their beef. Jon Jones and Rashad Evans. Every great young fighter needs a fearsome rival to contend with, and Rashad Evans was right on the money when he warned us about Jon Jones nearly a decade ago. Nowadays, the name Jon Jones is synonymous with controversy, with disappointment. Legal issues, personal struggles, doping controversies, these have all been part and parcel of the Jon Jones experience. Every time he appeared to have made progress, a shocking news report would surface that would suggest otherwise. But during his initial rise through the ranks of the light heavyweight division, the sky truly did seem to be the limit for this exciting new contender. Jones looked to have the attitude, the work ethic, and the drive to truly be great. Once he achieved his goal of becoming the sport's youngest UFC champion, something odd happened. Fighters such as Quinton Rampage Jackson and his old sparring partner Rashad Evans started to speak out, telling the media that Jon was by no means the clean-cut, soft-spoken gentleman he was portraying to the world. Accusations of Jones's fakeness eventually led to a huge rivalry between Jon and Rashad, with these former friends serving up one of the more personal feuds of the era in question. While Jon was largely dismissive of Evans, Rashad seemed to have a really strong distaste for the young champion, and when their fight eventually came, the fans expected an all-out war. However, Jones dominated the bout from start to finish, sending Rashad Evans on a downward spiral that would eventually see him post a 2-6 record before leaving the UFC in 2018. Ronda Rousey and Misha Tate. The greatest beef in women's MMA history never ended with a handshake, and it's not like Ronda Rousey would ever be the type to offer one. Already we can see how the history of Ronda Rousey is being rewritten due to her shocking fall from grace, but if you watched MMA through her best years in the sport, you'll know what a true force of nature she was, and few fighters, if any, were able to experience that firsthand quite like Misha Tate. 2 losses to Ronda and a memorable season of The Ultimate Fighter left Tate playing second fiddle to the true alpha that was the women's bantamweight queen. But it took a good-hearted figure like Misha to showcase a different side to Ronda, a side that showed her to be an aggressive, bad sport who antagonized everyone who she considered competition. Constant insults, mean mugging, and blatantly bad sportsmanship in victory allowed the world to see a superstar in Rousey, who was not only later shown to be a sore loser, but also a terrible winner. It was not hard to sympathize with Tate during the time she shared with Ronda, and in many ways, her only crime was standing in front of this trailblazing talent. When Rousey did eventually meet her maker in the form of Holly Holm, however, it was almost written in the stars that Misha would be the one to rise up, defeat the newly crowned champion, and become 135-pound queen in Rousey's absence, even if she never could quite get one over on her greatest foe. Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. The Brazilian Ninja and the American Gangster, the perfect combination for pure MMA rivalry gold. Sometimes a dominant champion needs an opponent like Chael Sonnen to really forge them into a superstar. But for a while, Chael was seen only as a loudmouth contender to Silva's belt. Entertaining, yes. A pay-per-view seller? Of course, but surely not a threat to the middleweight king. And boy did he milk his time in the spotlight. Sonnen repeatedly promised the world that even the great Anderson Silva would have no answer to his hard-nosed, gritty American wrestling. The fans laughed it off as empty trash talk, but Sonnen happened to know something that they did not. When fight night came around, the bad guy dominated Silva for the vast majority of the 25 minutes before making one fatal error in the final round, getting caught in a last-ditch triangle choke from the Spider. Even in defeat, Chael had managed to prove 99% of the sport's fan base wrong, and that performance alone was enough to make a legend of the bad guy. Tito Ortiz and Dana White. If you thought Uncle Dana would escape without his spot on this list, think again. The best feuds are those that start as friendships. And for UFC President Dana White and the huge star that was Tito Ortiz, their personal and professional relationship went from bad to worse over the years, to the point that now an entire security team would likely be needed to keep them apart. Prior to his days at the helm of the UFC, Dana was a boxing coach and a manager to several fighters, including Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz. Though Ortiz and White were once quite close, as Dana's own stature in MMA grew, so did the tensions between them. White left his role as Tito's manager, something that left the Huntington Beach bad boy feeling betrayed, now stuck as an employee to someone who had, in his eyes, cast him aside. Eventually, when their professional relationship ended, things got so bad that Tito actually wore a t-shirt with "Dana White is my bitch" to a UFC weigh-in, and shortly after, the pair were scheduled to fight in an exhibition boxing matchup. According to Dana, while he conceded that Tito would easily handle him in an MMA fight, they both knew who would come out on top in the squared circle. Funnily enough, it was Ortiz who pulled out of the fight, and to this day, their beef remains as alive as ever.